Betrayal is a bitter draught, but revenge is a dish, best served with the precision of a London winter. In a world of high-stakes aristocracy and cold gray skies, one woman discovers that the only thing more dangerous than a broken heart is a second chance at vengeance. Step into the shadow of the Shard and the opulent estates of the Cotswolds as we witness the ultimate undoing of a social climbing conspiracy. Blood stained the hem of my designer wedding dress as I stared at the twisted metal of the car wreck. My sister stood shivering in her stolen veil, clutching my fiancé's hand while I took my last agonizing breath on the cold asphalt of the M4. That was my original ending. A pathetic conclusion to a life spent yielding to a spoiled sibling who took everything: my parents' affection, my inheritance, and finally my groom. But death was not the end. Waking up exactly 6 months before that fatal ceremony, I knew exactly what I had to do: let her steal him again. Only this time, I would be the one setting the trap. And the man orchestrating my perfect revenge would be the billionaire who planned the doomed affair. Gasping for air, my eyes snapped open. My hands flew to my chest, expecting to feel the crushed ribs in the warm, terrifying spread of my own blood. Is it? My fingers brushed against the soft, cool silk of my duvet. I was in my own bed. The sun was streaming through the bay windows of my Kensington penthouse, casting long, peaceful shadows across the hardwood floor. I scrambled to the nightstand and grabbed my phone. October 14th. Exactly 6 months before the wedding. 6 months before Beatrice, my sweet, venomous younger sister, would orchestrate the accidental brake failure on my car just so she could take my place at the altar with Julian Street Clare. A cold, hard clarity washed over me. I wasn't dead. I was reborn. I had been given a second chance, a blank canvas to rewrite the tragedy of my own life. A sharp knock at my bedroom door broke my trance. Without waiting for an answer, Beatrice breezed in. She was wearing my favorite cashmere sweater, the one I had bought in Paris. It swallowed her petite frame, making her look fragile and innocent. Her signature look. "Arya," she chirped, hopping onto the edge of my bed. "Julian's downstairs. He came by to drop off the initial guest list drafts. And I hope you don't mind I borrowed this. I was just so cold this morning. In my past life, I would have forced a smile, swallowed my irritation, and told her she looked beautiful in it. I would have rushed downstairs to greet Julian, desperate for his crumbs of affection. No. Looking at her, all I saw was the girl who stood over my dying body with a triumphant smirk. "He bit," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Looks cheap on you anyway." Beatrice blinked, her doe eyes widening in shock. Her lower lip quivered. "Arya, why would you say something so mean? I need to get dressed. Tell Julian I'll be down in 20 minutes. I turned my back on her, walking toward the master bathroom. I didn't need to see her face to know she was seething. The mask had cracked just for a second. When I finally descended the grand staircase, I found them in the kitchen. Julian, handsome and utterly arrogant in his Savile Row suit, was leaning against the marble island. Beatrice was standing far too close to him, giggling as he showed her something on his phone. When he noticed me, he quickly stepped back, sliding the phone into his pocket. "Arya," he said, offering his standard practice smile. "You slept in." "I needed the rest," I replied, pouring myself a cup of black coffee. I didn't offer him a kiss. I didn't ask what they were laughing about. I knew exactly what it was. In my previous life, I had discovered months later that they had been exchanging mocking texts about my bridezilla tendencies since the day we got engaged. "Right. Well, I have a meeting at the firm," Julian said, adjusting his tie, clearly unsettled by my lack of warmth. "But Harrison Cole is expecting you at his office at noon. He wants to go over the venue layouts." Harrison Cole, the name sent a jolt through me. In my past life, Harrison was just the overly expensive, notoriously aloof wedding planner my parents had hired to ensure the Street Clare Astor merger. Disguised as a wedding, it was the social event of the decade. I barely spoke to him back then. I was too busy trying to appease Julian and manage Beatrice's constant tantrums. "I'll be there," I said. "I can go with you, Arya," Beatrice offered immediately, her eyes sparkling with false helpfulness. "You know how easily overwhelmed you get with aesthetics." "I can help." She wanted to go so she could sabotage the floral arrangements, insisting on lilies, a flower she knew gave me severe migraines. "No," I said flatly, looking her dead in the eye. "I'm going alone." 2 hours later, I walked into the sleek, minimalist headquarters of Cole Events in Mayfair. The receptionist ushered me into a corner office that looked more like a corporate boardroom than a wedding planner studio. Harrison Cole stood by the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the London skyline. When he turned around, I was struck by how imposing he was. He was tall, with sharp aristocratic features and piercing gray eyes that seemed to analyze everything in a fraction of a second. The rumor said he only took on 3 clients a year, and only if they bored him less than the alternative. "Miss Astor," he said, his voice a deep, resonant baritone. He gestured to the leather chair opposite his desk. "You're early and alone. Your fiancé informed me your sister would be joining to assist." "My sister is busy playing dress-up," I said smoothly, taking a seat and crossing my legs. "And I prefer to handle my own affairs, Mr. Cole." Harrison raised a dark eyebrow. Taking his seat, he opened a thick leather binder. "Very well. Let's discuss the venue. The Street Clare family is pushing for the Royal Berkshire Club. Your mother left 3 voicemails demanding the Kew Gardens Conservatory." "Cancel both," I said. Harrison paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He looked up, his gray eyes locking onto mine. "Excuse me? I don't want the club and I don't want the gardens. I want the cliffside estate at Dover." Harrison leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "That property is privately owned. It hasn't been rented out for an event in a decade. Furthermore, it's notorious for being a logistical nightmare." "Why there?" "Because, in my past life, that was where Julian had taken Beatrice for their secret weekend getaways. It was their hidden sanctuary. What better place to destroy them both?" "Because it's isolated," I said, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips. "And when a storm hits, there's nowhere to run." Harrison stared at me for a long, silent moment. The corners of his mouth twitched upward in a barely perceptible smirk. "You're planning a wedding, Miss Astor, not a siege. Why can't it be both, Mr. Cole?" Over the next 3 weeks, I played my part perfectly. I reverted to the stressed, accommodating fiancé, giving Beatrice just enough rope to hang herself. And she took it greedily. The first major battleground was the bridal salon. It was time for my initial dress fitting, an event that in my previous timeline ended in me crying in the dressing room, while Beatrice paraded around in a gown that was accidentally ordered in her size instead of mine. I arrived at the exclusive Knightsbridge boutique with Beatrice trailing behind me, practically vibrating with excitement. Julian had promised to meet us there later to see the veil, a gross violation of tradition that Beatrice had insisted upon, claiming Julian needed to approve the lace. The boutique owner, a flustered woman named Jade, ushered us into the VIP suite. The dress hung in the center of the room, a masterpiece of silk and intricate beadwork. "It's stunning," I murmured, playing the part of the struck bride. "It's a bit plain, don't you think?" Beatrice said, wrinkling her nose. She wandered over to a rack of outrageously dramatic plunging gowns. "Julian prefers things with a little more edge. You don't want him looking at the bridesmaids instead of you." "Arya, why don't I try it on?" "Jade," I said, ignoring my sister completely. The fitting took 30 minutes. When I stepped out onto the pedestal, even Beatrice was temporarily silenced. The dress fit flawlessly, hugging my curves and cascading into a dramatic train. Just then, the boutique door chimed, and Julian walked in, accompanied by someone I hadn't expected, Harrison Cole. "Julian," Beatrice squealed, rushing over to him and looping her arm through his. "You made it. Look at Arya's dress. It's nice, right?" Julian looked at me. For a split second, I saw genuine appreciation in his eyes. But then Beatrice leaned into his side, pressing her chest against his arm, and his gaze flickered down to her. "It's beautiful, Arya," Julian said, his voice lacking any real emotion. Very traditional. Harrison, standing a few feet behind Julian, caught my eye in the massive floor-to-ceiling mirror. His expression was unreadable, but his sharp gaze was taking in every detail of the room. Beatrice's possessive grip on Julian's arm, Julian's distraction, and my stony composure. "Now for the veil," Jade said, bustling over with a delicate cathedral-length piece of vintage lace. She carefully pinned it into my hair. "Let me see," Beatrice demanded, stepping onto the pedestal with me. She had a glass of sparkling cider in her hand, provided by the boutique. I knew exactly what was about to happen. I had lived this moment before. As she reached out to touch the lace, she deliberately stumbled. The glass tipped, sending a sticky amber wave of cider splashing directly onto the delicate vintage lace and the shoulder of my silk gown. Jade gasped in horror. "Oh my gosh!" Beatrice cried, her hands flying to her mouth in mock devastation. "Arya, I'm so sorry." My heel caught on the carpet. It was an accident, I swear. In my past life, I had screamed, had lost my temper, called her a careless brat, and demanded she leave. Julian had immediately defended her, calling me a hysterical bridezilla, and comforting a fake sobbing Beatrice while I stood humiliated in a ruined dress. This time, I didn't flinch. I looked calmly at the spreading stain, then at Beatrice's theatrical tears. I let out a soft, resigned sigh, and offered her a gentle, sorrowful smile. "It's okay, Beatrice," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "It's just a dress. I know you've always been a bit clumsy. It was just an accident." Beatrice froze. This wasn't the script she had written. She needed me to be the villain. "But your dress?" she stammered. "Jade can clean it, I'm sure," I said, stepping down from the pedestal. I looked at Julian. "Right, darling? No need to get upset over material things." Julian looked confused, completely disarmed by my reaction. He gently patted Beatrice's back, but there was no righteous anger to direct at me. "Right. It's fine. Beatrice is not mad." I walked toward the changing room, but as I passed Harrison Cole, he stepped smoothly into my path, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "Flawless execution, Miss Astor," he murmured, his gray eyes glinting with dark amusement. "But if you're going to play the martyr, you need better lighting. Your sister's foot was entirely flat on the ground when she tripped." I stopped, looking up at the towering wedding planner. "You're very observant, Mr. Cole." "It's my job to see everything," he replied. "I see a groom who is utterly oblivious, a sister who is playing a dangerous game, and a bride who is holding a lit match behind her back. And what do you do with that information?" I whispered back. Harrison leaned in slightly, the scent of bergamot and expensive cedar washing over me. "I offer to supply the gasoline. Meet me at my private office tonight at 8:00. We have much to discuss regarding the menu." The address Harrison had given me didn't lead to his sleek event planning studio. My driver pulled up to a towering, heavily secured skyscraper in the city of London. The plaque on the building read, "Cole Enterprise Holdings." I took the private elevator to the penthouse suite, my mind racing. Why would a wedding planner have an office in one of the most expensive commercial buildings in the city? The elevator doors pinged open, revealing a sprawling, ultramodern loft that commanded a 360-degree view of the London lights. Harrison was sitting behind a massive obsidian desk, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand. He looked less like an event coordinator and more like a corporate titan. "Right on time, Arya," he said, skipping the formal title. "Sit." He gestured to the leather sofa facing his desk. "Drink?" "Just water," I said, taking a seat. I looked around the room, taking in the original modern art and the Bloomberg terminals glowing softly in the corner. "You're not just a wedding planner, are you?" He chuckled. A rich, dark sound. "Event planning is a hobby, a very lucrative high society hobby that allows me unparalleled access to the private lives of the city's elite. My actual business is acquisitions, hospitality, and real estate. I own the venues, the catering companies, the floral farms, and the hotels your guests sleep in." I stared at him, piecing it together. You're a billionaire. Why on earth are you personally handling my wedding? Harrison set his glass down, his expression turning sharp and predatory. Because Julian Street Claire's father is attempting a hostile takeover of a logistics firm I have a vested interest in. The Astor Street Claire wedding is supposed to be the public display of unity that secures their family's credit line. This wedding happens smoothly. Street Claire Sr. gets the funding he needs to gut a company I built. So you took the job to sabotage it, I realized. A thrill of adrenaline shooting through my veins. I took the job to monitor the situation, Harrison corrected. But then I met you. The original Arya Astor was a doormat, completely blind to the fact that her sister and her fiancé were using her as a human shield. But the woman who walked into my office 3 weeks ago, she was different, calculating. You didn't want a wedding. You wanted an execution. He pressed a button on his desk, and a large flat-screen monitor on the wall hummed to life. High-definition photographs flashed across the screen. My breath caught in my throat. It was Julian and Beatrice. The first photo showed them slipping into the side entrance of the Savoy. The second was taken through a restaurant window showing Julian kissing Beatrice's neck while she laughed. The timestamps were from the past week. I have my own security teams, Harrison said softly, watching my reaction. I noticed the prolonged glances and the subtle touches. It didn't take much digging to find the rot beneath the floorboards. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt a profound, settling calm. In my past life, I hadn't found out about the affair until a week before the wedding when I caught them in Julian's office. By then, it was too late. The trap was set. Why are you showing me this? I asked, tearing my eyes away from the screen to look at Harrison. Because destroying Julian Street, Claire at the altar destroys his family's reputation, their credit, and their business, Harrison said, leaning forward. But you can't just break off the engagement now. They will spin the narrative. They will call you crazy, jealous, and unstable. Your sister will play the victim. You will lose. I know, I said fiercely. That's why I'm letting them think they're winning. Harrison smiled. And it was a dangerous, breathtaking thing. Exactly. We don't just cancel the wedding, Arya. We let them walk right up to the edge of the cliff. We invite the press, the investors, and the entire high society apparatus. We let Julian and Beatrice think they've successfully plotted behind your back. And then? I asked, leaning in. And then, at the rehearsal dinner, in front of the most powerful people in the state, we don't just light the match, we detonate the building. Harrison slid a heavy black velvet folder across the desk toward me. I have the resources to ensure they never recover socially or financially, but I need you to play the perfect unsuspecting bride for 3 more months. Can you do it? I looked at the folder, then up at the man who was offering me the keys to my own vengeance. My sister had murdered me for a man and a bank account. Julian had let her do it. I reached out and pulled the folder into my lap. I have literally died for this wedding, I said, my voice steady as stone. Playing the fool for 3 months is going to be a pleasure. Coffee burned my throat as I reviewed the altered catering contracts spread across Harrison's mahogany desk. For the past week, my life had become a meticulously choreographed double act. By day, I was Arya Astor, the damsel, slightly overwhelmed bride-to-be, who nodded along blindly to every demand my fiancé and sister made. By night, I sat in the penthouse office of Cole Enterprise Holdings, dismantling the Astor and Street Claire empires piece by piece, with a billionaire who treated my vengeance like a high-stakes corporate acquisition. Look at this addendum, Harrison said, his long, elegant fingers tapping a clause at the bottom of a vendor agreement. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket, and his white button-down shirt was rolled up at the sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. I had my legal team draft this under the guise of an insurance waiver for the Dover estate. In reality, Julian's father signed away his right to dispute the cancellation fees. When this wedding blows up, the Street Claire family will be on the hook for £4.2 million in non-refundable deposits. 4 million, I repeated. A slow, satisfying warmth spreading through my chest. In my previous life, my parents had footed the entire bill, nearly bankrupting my own trust fund to impress Julian's elitist family. His father will have a stroke. His company is already hemorrhaging cash. Exactly, Harrison murmured, leaning back in his leather chair, his gray eyes locking onto mine, with an intensity that always made my breath catch slightly. But financial ruin isn't enough, Arya. You want them humiliated. You want the kind of social destruction that money can't fix. I want them to feel exactly how I felt when I was bleeding to death on the asphalt, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. Harrison didn't flinch. He didn't ask questions about my bizarre phrasing. He just held my gaze, understanding the raw, unadulterated hatred radiating from my core. Then, we need an audience. A prominent one. I've reached out to Wells Hastings. My eyes widened. Wells Hastings was the primary venture capitalist, keeping the Street Claire logistics firm afloat. He was famously conservative, a man who built his empire on family values and public integrity. If Wells pulled his funding, the Street Claires were finished. You invited him to the wedding? I asked. I invited him to the rehearsal dinner, Harrison corrected, a wicked smirk playing on his lips. He rarely attends social functions, but I called in a favor. I told him he needed to see the synergy between the two families before finalizing his next round of investments. He will be sitting in the front row when the curtain drops. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating violently against the polished wood. The caller ID flashed. Beatrice. I let out a long, exhausted sigh and answered it, putting it on speaker so Harrison could hear the performance. Arya. Beatrice's voice trilled through the speaker, high-pitched and breathless. I'm at the travel agency with Julian. We're looking at honeymoon packages for you guys. You said you wanted the Maldives, but honestly, so cliché. Julian and I were thinking a skiing trip in the Swiss Alps would be so much more romantic. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. The Swiss Alps. Julian despised the cold. He was a notoriously weak skier and complained constantly about the altitude. But Beatrice loved skiing. She loved the designer winter wear and the cozy fireplaces. She was literally planning her own honeymoon, assuming she would be the one getting on that plane after my accident. You know, Beatrice, I said, infusing my voice with a perfect blend of naivety and gratitude. You're absolutely right. The Maldives is so humid. The Alps sound wonderful. Why don't you go ahead and book it? Put it under Julian's premium platinum card. He said he wanted to handle the honeymoon expenses. There was a slight pause on the other end. I knew Julian's premium card was currently maxed out, a secret he was desperately trying to hide from my father. Julian actually suggested we use your travel trust for the initial deposit, Beatrice stammered, clearly thrown off her script, just to secure the best chalet. No, I insisted sweetly. Julian was very adamant about treating me. Let him do this. He's such a provider. I hung up before she could formulate another excuse. Harrison let out a low, rumbling laugh that sent a shiver down my spine. You're ruthless, Miss Astor, Harrison said, pouring us both a glass of sparkling water. He's going to have to liquidate his secret offshore accounts, just to pay the deposit for a honeymoon he won't even be attending. He's going to need a vacation after we're done with him, I replied, taking the glass. Our fingers brushed, and I felt a sudden jolt of electricity. For a fleeting second, the cold shell of my revenge melted, leaving behind a terrifying vulnerability. Harrison Cole wasn't just a business partner anymore. He was the only person in the world who saw the real me. Tomorrow is your bridal shower, Harrison noted, seamlessly shifting the conversation back to business, though his eyes lingered on my hand for a fraction of a second. My head of security, Orrin Bennett, will be running the catering staff undercover. If your sister attempts any structural sabotage, he will intercept it. Your only job is to smile, open presents, and let Beatrice dig her own grave. She won't be able to resist making it about herself. I predicted she never can. Tension hung in the air of the Surrey Country Club ballroom, masked by the overwhelming scent of imported peonies and the chatter of 50 high society women. The bridal shower was in full swing, and my mother had spared no expense, eager to flaunt the Astor wealth to Julian's mother and her snobby country club friends. I sat in a high-backed wicker chair wrapped in floral vines, wearing a demure pastel pink sundress. I was playing the blushing bride to perfection, sipping a mimosa and thanking my bridesmaids for their lavish gifts. My closest friend from university, Greer Reynolds, sat to my right, keeping a suspicious eye on the room. "Where is your sister?" Greer muttered, leaning in close. "She's the maid of honor. She's supposed to be logging these gifts, not vanishing for 45 minutes. She's probably just touching up her makeup," I lied smoothly. In reality, I knew exactly where Beatrice was. Orrin Bennett, disguised in a crisp catering uniform, had covertly signaled me 20 minutes ago. Beatrice was in the club's administrative office, trying to bribe the event coordinator into switching the high-end champagne I had ordered with a cheap, headache-inducing vintage, pocketing the cash difference. It was a petty, pathetic move, but one that fit her perfectly. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. The chatter instantly died down, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Beatrice strode into the room. She was wearing a stunning floor-length silk slip dress. It was backless, deeply plunging in the front, and completely, undeniably brilliant white. In the rigid hierarchy of British high society etiquette, a guest wearing white to a bridal event was a declaration of war. It was a deliberate attempt to upstage the bride. In my past life, this was the moment I finally cracked. I had burst into tears, screamed at her in front of Julian's mother, and was subsequently branded unstable and jealous by everyone in our social circle. I watched her walk toward me, her face locked, in an expression of feigned innocence. "Oh, Arya!" she gasped loudly, ensuring the entire room was listening. "I am so sorry." The zipper on my pink dress broke in the bathroom. This was the only spare outfit I had in my car. "I feel terrible, but I couldn't miss my sister's special day." Greer bristled beside me, her fists clenching. "Are you kidding me? You carry a white silk evening gown in your trunk as a backup for a Sunday brunch?" I placed a calming hand on Greer's arm. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of my acting ability, and stood up. I didn't look angry. I looked intensely, heartbreakingly sympathetic. "Oh, Beatrice," I said softly, my voice projecting just enough to carry over the silent crowd. I stepped off the small dais and wrapped my arms around her. She stiffened in my embrace, completely thrown off guard. "It's perfectly fine," I continued, pulling back to look at her with wide, understanding eyes. "We all know how much you struggle with outfit coordination and, frankly, with your complexion. You need a color that brings out your features. It's just a color. After all, what matters is that you're here to support me and Julian." Whispers erupted around the room. Not whispers about my jealousy, but whispers about Beatrice's sheer desperation and my unparalleled grace. I saw Julian's mother, a terrifyingly strict matriarch, narrow her eyes at Beatrice in absolute disgust. "Thank you, Arya." Beatrice gritted out through a forced, rigid smile. Her eyes burned with a venomous fury. I had flipped the script. I had made her look like a pathetic, attention-seeking child, and I had done it with a smile. "Now," I announced to the room, clapping my hands lightly, "Beatrice has prepared a speech. She's been working on it all week." Beatrice paled. She hadn't prepared a speech. She had planned on the white dress, causing a scene that would end the party early. Well, she stammered, moving to the front of the room as the guests stared expectantly. She grabbed a microphone from a nearby stand. "I just want to say how happy I am for Arya and Julian. They are so perfect for each other." She was looking down at her phone, her hands trembling slightly. "Julian is a wonderful man. He is kind and generous, and he knows exactly what a woman needs. He always makes sure everyone feels taken care of. And Arya is so lucky to have him. I know he will always be close to our family. Very, very close." It was practically a confession. The double meanings were so thick you could cut them with a knife. Greer shot me a look of pure alarm, finally realizing that something was deeply wrong with this dynamic. As Beatrice finished her awkward, suggestive toast, I caught movement by the bar. Harrison Cole had slipped into the back of the room. He was dressed flawlessly in a charcoal suit, leaning against a marble pillar. He raised his glass to me in a silent, mocking toast to my sister's impending destruction. I smiled back, lifting my mimosa. The trap was set. They were walking right into the jaws of the beast. And they were smiling as they did it. Rain hammered against the windshield of the armored SUV Harrison had insisted on sending for me. It was Friday evening, the eve of the rehearsal dinner. We were driving up the winding, treacherous coastal highway toward the Dover estate. The sky was an angry, bruised purple, and the ocean crashed violently against the cliffs below. It was perfect, a gothic, isolated setting for a high society execution. When the SUV pulled up to the massive iron gates of the estate, they swung open silently. The property was breathtaking. A sprawling 3-story stone mansion perched on the very edge of the continent, surrounded by manicured but imposing gardens. As I stepped out of the vehicle, an umbrella was immediately opened over my head. Harrison stood there, the wind whipping his dark hair across his forehead. "Right on time," he said, offering his arm. "The guests are arriving. Your parents are already inside complaining about the dampness. Julian and your sister arrived 20 minutes ago. Are the cameras in place?" I asked quietly, wrapping my hand around his bicep. He felt like solid granite beneath the expensive wool of his suit. "Oren spent the entire morning wiring the property," Harrison confirmed, his voice low enough that the valets couldn't hear. "There are discrete lenses in every guest suite, the library, and the conservatory. If they breathe in the same room, we will have it in high-definition 4K. We walked into the grand foyer. It was a masterpiece of old-money architecture. Vaulted ceilings, a massive crystal chandelier, and a sweeping double staircase. Servants hired by Harrison's company were moving silently, offering trays of champagne and caviar to the arriving guests. I spotted Julian near the fireplace, holding court with a group of his groomsmen. He looked arrogant, his chest puffed out as he laughed at a joke. He was completely in his element, oblivious to the fact that the man who owned the very floor he stood on was currently holding the arm of the woman he was plotting to murder. "Arya," my mother called out, bustling over. "Finally! This weather is dreadful, and the cell service up here is completely non-existent." "That's part of the charm, Mother," I replied smoothly. "A disconnected, intimate weekend." "Well, go say hello to your fiancé," she instructed, shooing me away. I walked over to Julian. As I approached, he quickly checked his watch, his eyes darting toward the staircase. He was waiting for Beatrice. "Darling," I said, leaning in to give him a brief, chaste kiss on the cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne and deception. "The estate is magnificent, isn't it?" "It's impressive," Julian conceded, though his eyes were still scanning the room. "Have you seen your sister? She said she needed help bringing her bags up to her suite." "I haven't," I lied effortlessly. "She's probably exploring. Why don't you go find her?" "I need to review the seating chart with Harrison." Julian didn't need to be told twice. He excused himself with a hasty apology to his friends and practically jogged toward the east wing of the house. I turned and walked back toward Harrison, who was watching the exchange with a predator's calculating gaze. He gestured for me to follow him down a long, dimly lit corridor that led away from the main gathering areas. He ushered me through a heavy oak door and locked it behind us. We were in the estate's private study. The walls were lined with leather-bound books, and a fire cracked cheerfully in the hearth. On the massive desk in the center of the room, a bank of monitors had been set up, glowing brightly in the dim light. Oren Bennett was sitting at the controls, wearing headphones. "Status, Oren?" Harrison demanded, walking over to the screens. "Target acquired," Oren said grimly, tapping a few keys. "Camera 4. East Wing Guest Suite B." I stepped up beside Harrison, my heart pounding a heavy rhythm against my ribs. I looked at the center monitor. The high-definition feed showed Beatrice's opulent guest room. Beatrice was standing by the bed, wearing practically nothing. The door to the suite opened, and Julian slipped inside, locking it behind him. Before he could even say a word, Beatrice threw her arms around his neck, pulling him into a desperate, frantic kiss. "God, I hate playing this game." Julian's voice crackled clearly through the audio feed, a hidden microphone picking up every word. He pushed her back onto the mattress, hovering over her. "One more day, B. Just one more day, and after the honeymoon, we file the papers transferring the Astor Trust to my accounts." Then we don't have to hide anymore. Are you sure the mechanic did it right? Beatrice asked, her voice breathy, devoid of any sisterly affection. If the brakes don't fail completely on those mountain roads during the honeymoon. I paid him 50 grand, Julian snarled, his face twisting into an ugly, unrecognizable mask of greed. She's going off that cliff, and we're going to be rich. The breath left my lungs in a sharp, agonizing rush. Hearing them plan my murder in this timeline, seeing the raw sociopathic reality of their betrayal on screen, it hit harder than I expected. I stumbled backward, my knees suddenly weak. Before I could hit the floor, Harrison was there. His strong arms caught me, pulling me flush against his chest. He held me tightly, providing a physical anchor in a room that was suddenly spinning. "I've got you," he whispered fiercely into my hair. "I've got you, Arya. They are never going to touch you again." I buried my face in his shoulder, gripping the lapels of his suit as I fought to steady my breathing. It wasn't just revenge anymore. It was survival. "Download the file, Oren," Harrison commanded, his voice cold and lethal, devoid of any mercy. "Splice it into the presentation for the rehearsal dinner tomorrow. Make sure the audio is perfectly synced." Harrison pulled back slightly, forcing me to look up into his steely, uncompromising eyes. "Tomorrow night, Arya," he promised, his thumb gently brushing a stray tear from my cheek. "Tomorrow night, we burn their entire world to the ground." Rain lashed against the soaring glass walls of the Dover Estate Conservatory, a violent symphony that perfectly matched the tempo of my racing heart. It was Saturday evening, the rehearsal dinner. The air inside the sprawling botanical-themed hall was thick with the scent of expensive orchids, roasted lamb, and suffocating hypocrisy. 80 of the most influential figures in the state sat at long, mirrored banquet tables, illuminated by hundreds of floating candles. To my left sat my father, Tristan Astor, looking tired, but fiercely proud, as he poured a glass of vintage Bordeaux. To my right was my fiancé, Julian Street, Claire, radiating the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had just successfully stolen the keys to the kingdom. And directly across the room, seated with calculated precision next to Julian's sweating father, Archer Street Claire, was the man who held their financial lives in his hands. Wells Hastings. Hastings was a titan of venture capitalism, a man whose mere presence at a dinner table signaled a shift in the corporate tides. He was in his late 60s with iron gray hair and sharp, possessing eyes that seemed to strip the gold plating off everything he looked at. Harrison had placed him exactly where he would have an unobstructed view of the massive projection screen dominating the northern wall of the conservatory. "Nervous, darling?" Julian whispered, his hand sliding over mine on the table. His skin felt like dry snakeskin. "Just overwhelmed," I replied, offering a fragile, perfectly calibrated smile. "It's all so real now. It's going to be the perfect weekend," he assured me, squeezing my fingers before turning his attention back to his groomsmen. I looked down the table and caught Beatrice's eye. She was wearing a blood-red cocktail dress, a stark contrast to my understated ivory silk. She raised her champagne flute to me, her lips curling into a triumphant smirk. She thought this was her victory lap. She had spent the entire afternoon practically glued to Julian's side, testing the boundaries of my supposed obliviousness. Near the entrance, standing in the shadows of a massive weeping fig tree, was Harrison Cole. He was dressed in a tailored black suit that absorbed the ambient light, looking more like a predatory panther than an event coordinator. He caught my gaze, his expression unreadable, and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Oren Bennett was positioned at the soundboard, tucked away in the corner, his hands resting lightly on the mixing console. The trap was armed. All that was left was for the rats to take the cheese. Archer Street. Claire stood up, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass. The ringing sound cut through the low hum of conversation, silencing the room. Archer was a boisterous, overly red-faced man who built his logistics company on aggressive expansion and cheap credit that was rapidly running dry. Family, friends, and esteemed colleagues, Archer boomed, his eyes darting nervously toward Wells Hastings before sweeping over the crowd. "We are gathered here tonight to celebrate the union of two great dynasties. Tomorrow, my son Julian and the beautiful Arya Astor will combine their lives, bridging our families in a partnership built on love, trust, and mutual prosperity. He spent the next 10 minutes delivering a nauseatingly corporate speech, heavily emphasizing the word synergy, and practically begging Hastings with his eyes to approve the next round of funding. When Archer finally sat down to polite applause, Julian stood. He adjusted his tie, flashed his brilliant practice smile, and looked down at me. When I first met Arya, I knew my life was going to change, Julian began, his voice dripping with false sincerity. She's my rock, my moral compass, and my greatest supporter. They say behind every successful man is a brilliant woman. But Arya isn't behind me. She stands beside me, and I promise, in front of all our loved ones, to spend the rest of my life protecting her, honoring her, and keeping her safe. A collective awe rippled through the older women in the room. I felt bile rise in my throat, but I forced my eyes to shine with unshed, manufactured tears. To Arya, Julian toasted, raising his glass. To Arya, the room echoed as Julian took his seat. Beatrice practically vaulted out of her chair. It was time for the maid of honor speech. She strutted to the front of the room, taking the microphone from a waiter. Well, Julian, that's going to be tough to follow, Beatrice laughed, tossing her dark hair over her shoulder. For those who don't know me, I'm Beatrice, Arya's younger and, let's be honest, much more fun sister. A few polite chuckles scattered across the room. My friend Greer, sitting 2 tables away, looked like she wanted to throw a dinner roll at her head. Arya and I have always shared everything, Beatrice continued, her eyes locking onto Julian's for a fraction of a second too long. Clothes, secrets, dreams, and it's so hard to let her go. But knowing she's going to a man like Julian makes it easier. Julian is incredible. He pays attention to the little things. He knows what a woman really wants, even when she doesn't know it herself. The room grew slightly quieter. The subtle, inappropriate undertones of her speech were beginning to register with the more observant guests. I saw Hastings narrow his eyes, setting his fork down. So, to my sister, Beatrice said, raising her glass high, may your marriage be exactly what you deserve. And to Julian, welcome to the family. We're going to be so close. She walked back to her seat, her hips swaying deliberately. Julian stared at his plate, a faint flush creeping up his neck. Now, it was my turn. Clearing my throat, I stood up slowly, smoothing the skirt of my ivory dress. The room fell into a breathless silence. I didn't take the microphone. I just let my voice carry through the acoustic perfection of the glass conservatory. Thank you, Julian. Thank you, I said softly, sounding slightly breathless. Your words mean more to me than you will ever comprehend. As the bride, I wanted to give something back to all of you tonight, a gift to show the true depth of the bond between our families. I gestured toward the massive screen at the front of the room. I spent weeks putting together a presentation, a tribute to the people I love most. Please enjoy. I sat down. Across the room, I made eye contact with Harrison. The corners of his mouth twitched upward into a phantom smile. At the soundboard, Oren pressed play. The lights in the conservatory dimmed to a low, dramatic glow. The massive projector hummed to life, casting a brilliant square of light against the wall. Soft acoustic music began to play, a gentle, romantic melody. The screen displayed a beautiful, professional engagement photo of Julian and me walking through a sunlit park. Arya and Julian. A love story. Elegant script faded onto the screen. A collective murmur of appreciation washed through the crowd. My mother reached over and patted my arm. Arya, how sweet, she whispered. The image transitioned to a photo of our families at a holiday dinner, then a picture of Beatrice and me as children. The narrative was perfect. It was everything a rehearsal dinner presentation should be. Then, the acoustic music abruptly cut out, replaced by the hiss of raw, unedited audio. The screen flickered, the high-definition color shifting into the stark, slightly shadowed lighting of a security camera feed. The timestamp in the corner read, Friday 4:15 p.m. Yesterday, the guests leaned forward, confused by the sudden shift in production quality. The video showed a luxurious bedroom, guest suite B, in the East Wing. A second later, the door flew open on screen, and Beatrice dragged Julian into the room by his lapels, slamming the door shut behind them. A collective gasp sucked the oxygen out of the conservatory. Before anyone could process what they were seeing, the audio kicked in, projected through state-of-the-art surround sound speakers. God, I hate playing this game. Julian's voice boomed through the room, crystal clear and heavy with lust. On screen, he shoved Beatrice back onto the mattress, climbing over her. My father stood up so fast, his chair crashed to the floor behind him. What the hell is this? He roared. But Oren had locked the soundboard. The audio was deafening, drowning out the ensuing chaos. One more day, B. The digital Julian promised. Grinding against my sister. Just one more day, and after the honeymoon, we file the papers, transferring the Astor Trust to my accounts. Then we don't have to hide anymore. Pandemonium erupted. Archer Street Claire turned the color of spoiled milk, clutching his chest as he stared at the screen in abject horror. My mother let out a piercing shriek, burying her face in her hands. Julian sat frozen beside me, his jaw slack, all the blood draining from his perfectly tanned face. He looked like a corpse. Beatrice jumped up, screaming hysterically. Turn it off! Turn it off right now! It's fake! It's AI! Arya made it up, but the video was merciless. It zoomed in on their faces, completely undeniable in 4K resolution. Are you sure the mechanic did it right? Beatrice's breathy, malicious voice echoed off the glass ceiling, silencing the screaming crowd with the sheer gravity of her words. If the brakes don't fail completely on those mountain roads during the honeymoon, the conservatory went dead silent. The shock of infidelity had instantly mutated into the horrifying reality of attempted murder. I paid him 50 grand. Julian snarled on screen, his face twisted in greed. She's going off that cliff, and we're going to be rich. The screen went to black. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, and heavy with the weight of destroyed lives. The only sound was the rain hammering relentlessly against the glass. Then, the explosion. My father surged forward. Lunging across the table, he grabbed Julian by the throat of his expensive tuxedo, dragging him halfway across the table, shattering plates and crystal goblets. You son of a my father, roared, his face purple with murderous rage. You are going to kill my daughter. I'll tear you apart with my bare hands. Tristan, stop. Archer Street, Claire yelled, scrambling out of his seat. There has to be a mistake. Julian wouldn't do this. This is a setup. A setup? A cold, authoritative voice cut through the shouting. Wells Hastings stood up slowly. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin, his expression one of supreme aristocratic disgust. He looked directly at Archer Street Claire. Archer, Hastings said, his voice quiet, but carrying enough weight to freeze the room. You invited me here to witness the synergy of your family. Consider it witnessed. Wells, please, Archer begged, sweat pouring down his face. This is a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Your son is applauding murder, and your company is a hollow shell built on my money, Hastings stated flatly. He tossed his napkin onto the table. I am pulling out of the Series C funding round. Effective immediately. Furthermore, my legal team will be contacting the SEC regarding your fraudulent asset reporting. You are finished, Archer. Archer gasped for air, his knees giving out as he collapsed back into his chair, clutching his chest. He was having a panic attack, watching his entire empire disintegrate in real time. Julian! Beatrice shrieked, trying to run toward the head table. Julianne? Do something. Greer Reynolds stepped into the aisle, grabbed a full pitcher of ice water, and hurled the contents directly into Beatrice's face. Shut your mouth, you sociopathic parasite, Greer snarled. Julian finally managed to shove my father backward, gasping for air as he scrambled away from the table. His eyes were wild, darting around the room, finally locking onto me. I hadn't moved an inch. I sat calmly in my chair, watching the wreckage with cold, unblinking satisfaction. You, Julian stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. You did this. You set this whole thing up. I simply provided the entertainment, Julian, I said, my voice eerily calm, cutting through the ambient shouting. You provided the script. I'll kill you, Julian screamed, losing his mind entirely. He lunged at me, his fists clenched, his face a mask of desperate, humiliated rage. He never made it within 5 feet of me. Orrin Bennett moved with terrifying speed, stepping out from the shadows. He intercepted Julian mid-lunge, twisting Julian's arm behind his back with a sickening pop and slamming him face first into the polished hardwood floor. Julian shrieked in agony, his nose bleeding profusely onto the wood. Restrain him. A deep, resonant voice commanded. Harrison Cole stepped out of the shadows, walking slowly into the center of the room. The ambient light caught the sharp angles of his face. He radiated a dark, overwhelming authority that instantly commanded the attention of every terrified guest in the room. Mr. Cole? My father asked, breathing heavily, completely bewildered by the wedding planner's sudden shift in demeanor. Tristan, Harrison said, respectfully acknowledging my father. I apologize for the disruption to your evening, but as the owner of this estate and the primary debt holder of Street, Claire Logistics, I felt it necessary to intervene. Archer Street. Claire's head snapped up, his eyes bulging. You're the one who bought out our mezzanine debt last month. Harrison looked down at the pathetic, ruined man. I am. And, as of this morning, you are in default. My legal team will be seizing your assets on Monday. But that is the least of your concerns. Harrison reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick legal envelope. He tossed it onto the table in front of Archer. When your son signed the venue contracts for this weekend, he signed an ironclad, non-refundable cancellation clause, Harrison stated, his voice ringing with finality. The penalty for breach of contract, due to criminal negligence, is £4.2 million. Payable immediately to Cole Enterprise Holdings, Archer Street. Claire let out a broken, choking sob and buried his face in his hands. The Street Claire family was not just ruined, they were financially annihilated. The authorities arrived 20 minutes later, their sirens wailing through the coastal storm. Harrison's security team had already handed over a flash drive containing the high-definition video and audio recordings to the lead detective. Julian was dragged out in handcuffs, sobbing and begging his father for help. Archer Street. Claire didn't even look at him. He was too busy being loaded into the back of an ambulance, clutching his chest in a state of shock. Beatrice was weeping hysterically in the corner of the conservatory. She tried to run to my mother, her arms outstretched. Mom, please, you have to believe me. Please. Just talk. I didn't mean it. My mother, her face stained with tears and mascara, slapped Beatrice across the face with a resounding crack that echoed off the glass walls. You are no daughter of mine, my mother hissed, her voice trembling with absolute disgust. Pack your bags. You are dead to this family. Beatrice collapsed onto the floor, wailing, finally realizing that her toxic charms had lost all their power. The guests were slowly filing out of the conservatory, ushered away by Harrison's staff. Whispers of the scandal were already echoing through the hallways. By tomorrow morning, the Astor Street Park Claire disaster would be the only thing anyone in the state was talking about. I stood in the center of the ruined banquet hall, looking at the shattered glass and the overturned chairs. The adrenaline that had sustained me for the past 3 months was rapidly leaving my system, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. But beneath the exhaustion was something else. Freedom. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs without the crushing weight of expectation pressing down on my chest. I wasn't the victim anymore. I hadn't died on an asphalt road in a stolen veil. I had fought back, and I had won. You played your part flawlessly. I turned around. Harrison was standing a few feet away, watching me with those piercing gray eyes. The cold corporate mask he wore for the public was gone, replaced by a softer, infinitely more dangerous intensity. We played our parts, I corrected, a tired but genuine smile touching my lips. I couldn't have done it without the gasoline. Harrison took a slow step toward me, closing the distance between us. The scent of bergamot and cedar wrapped around me, grounding me in the aftermath of the chaos. The street. Claire's are finished, Harrison murmured, his gaze dropping briefly to my lips before rising to meet my eyes. Hastings just texted me. The board is voting to dissolve their firm on Monday. Julian will likely face 10 to 15 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Your sister will be entirely cut off, forced to fend for herself. Good, I whispered. So, Harrison said, his voice dropping an octave, rich and resonant. The trap is sprung. The debt is paid. What happens to Arya Astor now? I looked up at the towering billionaire who had handed me the sword for my own execution. In my past life, I had settled for safety, for a man who offered a comfortable illusion. Now, staring at Harrison Cole, I knew I could never go back to safe. I'm not sure, I admitted, my heart fluttering as he reached out, his knuckles gently brushing against my cheek. I suppose I have a newly freed-up schedule. I have a proposition, Harrison said softly. He stepped closer, eliminating the space between us. His hand slid to the nape of my neck, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw. Cole Enterprises is expanding its hospitality division. I need a partner. Someone ruthless. Someone who understands the absolute value of loyalty. Someone who knows how to burn a room to the ground and walk out without a scratch. I leaned into his touch, the warmth of his hand sending a shiver down my spine. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Cole? Harrison smiled, and it was a breathtaking, possessive thing that made my pulse hammer in my throat. I'm offering you an empire. Are you? He whispered, his face inches from mine. I spent the last 3 months watching you dismantle the people who hurt you. And every second I spent watching you, I realized I never want to stop. He didn't ask for permission. He leaned down and captured my lips with his. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a collision of power and undeniable chemistry. It tasted like victory, like rain, and like a future I was finally in control of. I wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him closer, anchoring myself to the man who had helped me rewrite my destiny. When we finally broke apart, I was breathless, my hands resting flat against his chest, feeling the steady, powerful rhythm of his heart. Big, I said, a spark of pure, unadulterated fire returning to my eyes. We're going to make a terrifying team. Harrison chuckled, wrapping his arm around my waist and leading me toward the exit of the glass conservatory. Let them be terrified, he said, opening the heavy oak door leading back into the mansion. The world belongs to us now. We walked out into the grand foyer, leaving the shattered remains of the Street Claire dynasty behind us in the dark. And so, the curtains close on the most scandalous event of the decade. From the hidden cameras in the guest suite, to the billionaire's ultimate flex in front of the entire London elite, Arya and Harrison completely dismantled Julian and Beatrice's toxic plot. Do you think Julian got exactly what he deserved with that non-refundable £4.2 million penalty? Or did Arya go too far by destroying his father's entire logistics empire in the process? Drop your thoughts, theories, and favorite moments in the comments below. I want to hear your take on this incredible revenge strategy. If you love stories about epic comebacks, high society drama, and karma hitting harder than a London bus, you have to smash that like button. Share this video with your friends to see their reaction to the rehearsal dinner scene. And make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss another thrilling story. See you in the next one.